Okay, perfect. Okay, let's get into it. Okay. So, hi everyone. Thanks for coming. This is my presentation titled "The Neural Control of Aggressive Behavior: Preclinical, Clinical, and Evolutionary Data." Okay, and to start, basically, when you place a bunch of mice into a large, semi-naturalistic arena, they naturally develop territorial behavior. That is, dominant territory-holding animals tend to express territorial defense, and subordinate non-territory holding animals tend to express conspecific avoidance or anxiety. Okay? And so focusing in on this aggression portion, specifically when we talk about aggression in neuroscience, there are actually different types. For example, the LH, or the lateral hypothalamus, facilitates what we call appetitive aggression. That is, aggression linked with desire, typically in the form of biting in animals, where if we artificially stimulate the LH using optogenetics, for example, we find an increase in biting. Let me show you. Okay. And so this will be the baseline session, so the LH will not be stimulated. And you'll see that in the mouse with the wire in its head, the white mouse, there's some sniffing, some aggressive cuddling, but nothing too significant from my perspective. Okay? And now is a stimulation session, and you can see there's an increase in biting. Okay? And you can actually see the light flashing on the mouse's brain. Okay? That was kind of fast. Does anyone need to see that again? Don't be shy. But okay, to recap, again, the LH, or the lateral hypothalamus, facilitates appetitive or desire-based aggression. In contrast, the VMH, or the ventromedial hypothalamus, facilitates violent attacks or impulsive attacking. Where if we artificially stimulate the VMH using optogenetics, we find an increase in attacking. Okay, let's visualize. All right, so this is the baseline session, so the light is currently not activated, and you'll see that there's currently no social interaction. Now the laser's on, and there's an increase in attacking. These twitchy movements are what we call violent attacks. Okay. Now the laser's off, and there's a reduction in aggression. Okay. Anyone need to see that again? Okay. Just let me know. Okay. All right. And so to recap again, in neuroscience, there are different types of aggression. The LH, or the lateral hypothalamus, facilitates what we call appetitive or desire-based aggression. And the VMH facilitates violent or impulsive attacking. Okay? And essentially, these are two different forms of subcortical aggression. Sorry, I'll say it again. These are two different forms of subcortical aggression, i.e., aggression that doesn't require the cortex. But interesting enough, the cortex could actually influence these behaviors, perhaps turn them on when needed or as appropriate. Where if we artificially stimulate the projections from the cortex to the LH using some genetic techniques, we find an increase in biting. Okay? Where again, if you recall, the LH facilitates biting, and by turning on the signals from the cortex to the LH, we recapitulate this effect or find this effect again. Okay? Likewise, or in contrast, activating the signals from the cortex to the VMH increases attacking. Okay? All right. And so this is quite interesting to me because the cortex is known as this place for slowing down behavior, reducing aggression. But interesting enough, it could actually turn it on when needed or as appropriate. Perhaps at an appropriate level, where there's a number of studies providing support for this bidirectional control of the cortex on aggressive behavior. Okay? where basically, depending on how intensely we stimulate the VMH using optogenetics, we get different levels of aggressive behavior. For instance, weak stimulation of the VMH produces mounting or body pitting behavior, and strong activation of the VMH produces violent attacks, as you've seen. Okay? And so essentially, if we could do this manually or exogenously using optogenetics, why can't the cortex do the same thing internally or endogenously? Okay? Hopefully giving more support, or perhaps giving more support for this bidirectional or fine-tuned control of the cortex on aggressive behavior. Okay? Okay. And so building on this effect, another reason why I find this quite interesting is because humans also show a similar mechanism, i.e. it's conserved throughout evolutionary history, and it translates from rodents to humans. For instance, when we look at reactive or impulsive aggression in humans, we find that there's more activity in the subcortex, or there's an increase in activity in the subcortex. See that? Yeah. Where when we look at psychopathic behavior specifically, the more psychopathic you are, the less cortical activity you express. Okay? Where psychopathic behavior is associated or positively correlated with impulsive aggression. Okay? In contrast, during proactive or reason-based aggression, or aggression that you believe is right, or moral aggression, we actually find an increase in activity in the cortex in humans. Okay? So basically, people will show increased activity in the cortex during proactive aggression. Okay? Where Machiavellianism is basically strategic social dominance. Okay? Or manipulative behavior. Okay? Okay. And so the paradigm I'm trying to set up, I hope to set up, is the following. It seems that during reactive or impulsive aggression, humans show increased activity in the subcortex, in contrast to proactive or moral-based or reason-based aggression, where increased cortical activity is observed. So subcortex reactive, proactive, or cortex proactive. Okay. Okay. And so an interesting exception to this rule or this paradigm I just set up is in the case of trauma, where basically people with experience with trauma, such as people with PTSD or war experience, actually show increased activity in the cortex during impulsive aggression. Okay. Which to me has some interesting implications for personalized medicine, i.e. how to treat these specific people or patients reporting these symptoms or experiences. Okay. All right. And so, somewhat moving on, as many of you guys know, often when I look at depression, I typically apply something that's known as the comorbid theory of depression. That is, I see depression as linked with a number of different pathologies. For instance, people often say that anxiety and depression are related, and there's similar evidence for sleep, inflammation, obesity, and etc. Where essentially you guys here have done a pretty good job at really providing support for this theory. Okay? I'll say quite impressively. Okay? But okay, building on this, what I hope to begin constructing now is the comorbid theory of aggression. So essentially, disclaimer, this theory is still in the works, and I'm still thinking through things, hence why there's some visible question marks on the model. And I'm happy to discuss how we could potentially improve on this model during the discussion period. But it does seem that a number of different pathologies are linked to aggressive behavior, such as impulsivity, xenophobia, and ADHD. Where we've also recently written on this. Specifically here, we discuss the effect of estrogen on impulsive behavior in aggression, but we also discuss other factors that may play a role in aggressive behavior, such as xenophobia, ADHD, and the dark triad traits you see below. Okay? Specifically, narcissism and psychopathology. Okay? All right. And so, what's the practical relevance of all this? I.e., what's the practical relevance of all this stuff I'm bringing up today? Well, when we look at the genetics of different African tribes, we find something that's quite interesting, in my opinion. For example, the Datoga tribe, which is a tribe well known for being territorial, have an increased level of aggression-related genes. Okay. In contrast, the Hadza tribe, which are nomadic hunter-gatherers, have an increased level of anxiety or suicide-related genes. Okay. And so, just to take a step back, I encourage you to think about, or I pose the question, does this look familiar to you? I.e., does this paradigm or dichotomy between territorial aggression and non-territorial anxiety or avoidance seem familiar to you? Well, it's what I opened up my talk with. I.e., dominant territory-holding animals tend to express territorial defense, and subordinate non-territory-holding animals tend to express conspecific avoidance or anxiety. And this is quite interesting in my perspective. It means the stuff we do in the laboratory does indeed extrapolate to existing human cultures. The goal of so much science today is to have and to develop a relevant scientific model. And it looks like we're approaching that. Okay. And so essentially, these differences within the same continent are what I like to call horizontal selection, or intracontinental differences. Okay. In contrast, differences between continents is what I like to call vertical selection, or intercontinental differences. Okay. Where basically, if we look at the frequency of ADHD-related genes in native populations in different continents, we find something that's quite interesting in my perspective. For example, when we compare the frequency of ADHD-related genes in natives in Africa versus Europe, we find that natives in Africa and Europe have a similar level of ADHD promoting genes. Okay. However, it seems that people in Europe have an increased level of ADHD protective genes. Okay. In my view, setting up this hypothesis suggesting that in Africa, it seems that ADHD is adaptive, in contrast to Europe, where perhaps depression has evolved. Where if we look at the global depression rates, specifically comparing Africa to Europe, it does seem that there's more depression the more north we go. Okay. In the literature, this is what we call human domestication, i.e. a reduction in aggression or a reduction in instinctive behavior or human instincts. Where a number of literature in the field has suggested that there's a positive relationship between domestication and depression. We've written on it quite recently, and there's some other articles in the field. You good? What's up? Okay. Okay. All right. And so we could certainly discuss all you like or all we like during the discussion period about how reduced aggression might directly promote depressive behavior. But in my view, it certainly seems that reduced aggression means a reduction in resilience. Well, I don't think anyone would doubt that a reduction in resilience means depression. All right. And so as we near closing, here's how I see the scientific pipeline moving forward for regression research. Basically, I see our preclinical research and our evolutionary analyses as being bi-directionally connected to our ability to perform clinical research and provide personalized therapeutics. Okay? Basically, I see all three of these nodes as interacting with each other. Okay? Okay. And so on this theme of different types of aggression and proactive aggression, I'll end with a quote by one of my favorite songs, by one of my favorite rappers, to hopefully shed some humanity behind some of our gangster rappers and the complexity and thoughtfulness behind their behavior. I.e., it's not all black and white at the extremes. It's not all impulsive versus non-impulsive at the extremes. There's a continuum from impulsive aggression to controlled, planned, or moral-based aggressive behavior. Okay? Likewise, this song has got me through a lot of important times in my life, so I feel compelled to share it. And I hope some people find it as useful to themselves as I have found it to myself. Okay. And so yeah, as I read out the lyrics, there will be some highlights, and those highlights will correspond to specific labels, and those labels, in my opinion, are indicators of reason-based behavior, or higher level thinking. Proactive aggression. Plenty of times you don't hurt me, I done it all alone at night. They claim that they with me, but man, I know that they ain't right. Gotta stay down and get it. I know that it's gonna be alright. Can't get knocked off my pivot. I gotta play my cards right. Gotta stack up them Benjis, my brother. We gon' ball for life. Yeah. Okay. And so yeah, that's it for my presentation today. I'm open to any questions, guys. Okay. Lonzy, again, I'm clapping for me, bro. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Any questions? Well, honestly, it's just you can take your time. Yeah. What's up?
Could you potentially just clarify and give examples of the different types of aggression that you touched on?
Yeah. Interesting. That's a good question. No. Yeah. In preparation for this, I did want to read the different types of regression scales. Basically, the number one difference between proactive and reactive aggression is there a reason behind the aggressive behavior? So exactly, I recall, we can actually look at the scales actually if you want. I was actually working on this. That could be a good use of our time. Did I download it recently? Yeah, actually, no, that's not what I wanted. Proactive aggression. Honestly, in my opinion, like how I'm trying to divide things is I'm trying to use, well, this thing is like in the way, whatever. What was I going to say? If it involves the cortex, I try to say that's not how everybody does it. I'll show you what's standard. But if it involves the cortex, I say that's proactive. If it doesn't, I say it's reactive, basically. But let me know if this is good enough, and we could discuss more. So for example, this is how they run the scale. So they just basically ask people if they ask them questions, and they say, does it happen to them? Yes, no, or often, whatever, those are the options. And then some of these will be for proactive aggression, some of them for a reactive aggression. And so we'll go through some proactive examples. So those are 2, 4, and 6. Had fights to show people who was on top. And if they say yes, I mean, basically, they have proactive aggression, but basically, there was a reason behind this type of fight in that example. They fought to show dominance. That's what they're saying is proactive aggression. Maybe we'll do one more. Okay, this one's not too striking, but taking things from others, that doesn't mean. Actually, no, I'll also mention this. It's interesting because reactive or retaliation, and I put that in that quote I showed earlier, retaliation actually shows increased cortical activity. And I think that's striking because like you have to know who you're retaliating against, basically. Like there's some higher level thinking involved with. with retaliation. Like you're going to retaliate at this person that fought you back, basically. Yeah. So do you have any other specific questions there? Yes, the idea is there a reason behind it? If yes, it's proactive, and there's some other situations like retaliation that also expresses increased cortical activity. Anyone else? Yeah, what's up?
So like when translating this over to studying for like humans, can you talk about some of like the controversies that might be around that like research? Like, because obviously we can't just stick two humans together to fight. So like, how would we kind of approach that studying humans?
Yes. Let me know if this answer is okay. So when I practiced this talk in front of my postdoc friend, she said, "I'll always have the future studies like prepared, basically." So animal studies, it would be. Sorry, because it's in my mind. Sorry. I'll just I'll say it because it's in my mind right now. So, what are the future studies moving forward, and then we kind of build on that discussion. So, I kind of established that there's this circuit between the cortex and the lower levels part of the brain that influences aggression. The next steps would be what are the signals that send images to the cortex or send signals to the cortex that produce aggression, or what are the signals that that these guys send to after, basically. Like we wrote on, actually I won't say this on camera, but we wrote on some areas of the brain, basically, areas that might play a role in aggression. Other ones would be what are the other brain regions that play a role in aggressive behavior. I'll mention this one because it's kind of interesting. I sent it to the group chat yesterday, but it seems that during PTSD, like PTSD-induced aggression, you have the amygdala and the VMH active at the same time. So you have fear and aggression active together. So that'll be the next thing. Identify, like build the circuits. And the number one way to publish in my eyes would be just to find a connection to what we already know. Like either afferent, so to the region, or efferent, so like exiting the region. But okay, in humans, how would we do this? I'll let you know there's so many different ways we could do this, but this is the one way I think, I'll put it this way, just because so I mentioned to you earlier that there isn't a lot of work in aggression in general. And don't worry about the slide, just put it up. But basically, we're running depression studies in a bunch of different ways. You'll just be taking those depression studies and doing them in humans, and then see how they report if they feel aggressive, basically. So, for example, we run ketamine trials. We give people ketamine, and then see how they report on a depression scale. One answer would be if we give people a drug, and then see if that has an effect on aggression. Maybe two on that. One thing some people did before was actually take out, like, inactivate certain brain regions in humans. So I mentioned PTSD-induced aggression. Some people, I think they actually like manually inactivated the amygdala, and that reduced aggression in humans. Like in those I guess maybe older studies. But I don't know, this camera's on it. Look at this. I'm actually thinking through this. So how do I best put this? So yeah, as you guys know, I'm a reviewer, so I get a lot of papers, and I see how people actually conduct their studies, and how one of the papers I thought was really cool. What they did for depression was they took a bunch of people with depression and people without depression, and basically identified what genes were upregulated in the people with depression using PCR, if you guys know what that is, RT-qPCR. It's a way to check if the genes are upregulated. So one future potential study would be identify people that have aggression and people that don't have aggression, and have our list of genes that we want to see if they're upregulated. Take those people's genes and see if they're upregulated in people with depression using a cotton swab, or maybe we can get blood samples, but like a cotton swab is so easy to, like, it doesn't seem like there's any problems with that. Does that sound okay? But yeah, I'm not actually asking people to get into fights and see if it has an effect. It would be like, do they score high on these scales for aggression? And then that'll help us determine if they're aggressive. I'll mention one more thing on that. How do I best put it? Like, just, like ethically. But so I saw this I mentioned this in the group chat too, and I'll get to other questions in a second. But there was a study that suggested, this was their methodology. They made people basically have sexual intercourse, basically, and then their hypothesis was, like, the immune system is active in response to sex or vaginal sex. So they had people have sex like an hour before the study, took their samples, and then actually measured their levels of inflammation. Yeah, like we could do something similar, like put two people in a boxing ring and then see what happens after, or we could actually like after a fight or something like that, see what's active. I should also mention that there's different types of aggression, like how it manifests in humans. Like bullying could be like it could be verbal aggression, like physical aggression, competitive behavior, and etc. So like there's so many different avenues we could go, and like we could basically assess them using existing models that I mentioned, or like standard ways that we look at behavior overall. Is that okay? That was a lot. Okay. Any other questions? Well, really let me know, honestly. I could talk about anything. You had something? Yes, Dingo? Yeah, what's up?
Thank you for the presentation.
Of course.
Really interesting to learn that is also aggression facilitating inside of our cortex.
Yes.
Wondering if you can speak generally in the long run, how would this finding just influence our medication or aggression-related symptoms treatment?
I have no idea. The thing I always tell people at the start is like I'm not a doctor, so I actually can't give medications. But for some reason, doctors actually read my papers and make decisions based on that. So that's quite the dilemma. So you're talking about therapy. Maybe I'll say this. So it looks like aggression is rising, or if you read my papers, like 4.4 million people die by aggression per year. Like that should be a reason to some people to actually study aggression and try to treat it. So, and we have the tools to actually execute treating that or approach that research. I don't know anything active right now for aggression. That's all I'll say. Yeah. Anything else? Take your time, guys. Mm-mm. Mm. Yeah, what's up? Yeah.
I'm curious about one of the data is like the one you compare like the gene aggression versus like depression in Europe and African people.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's not aggression. It's ADHD. But yeah, as you see this model I've set up, I've also said ADHD might play a role in aggression, so it is relevant. Yeah, basically what they did here was they took cotton swabs, I think, of like, natives. So was it this one? No, it's not this one. So this one they took cotton swabs and then just we call PCR up the genes. So they amplify the genes and then saw what genes were higher in people with higher in which group basically. But for this, what they did here, and this is kind of why I kind of encourage you guys. Like I put a bunch of ideas in the group chat. Like I realized for this paper, what they did was they took already out their data from a bunch of different studies. So let's say Group A took the genetics of what's that place? Like Europeans, like Russian populations. Some people took African populations. So they took a bunch of data from different studies, put them together, and then found these results. Like you can see, there's results for every. Maybe I'll pull out the paper. Actually, let's see if we can find it. Did you have any specific questions with regard to the paper or these results?
Yeah, just
What was this? Novelty seeking. Sure, yeah. Maybe you can see this trick I just pulled. Novelty trace RD4, Corin 2016. Yeah, there we go. No, man, no. Yeah. So I actually pulled a big trick. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. So these are actual results. So you can see Africa. So everybody has these levels of. So 2 are, so the blue means like no ADHD or ADHD protective. 4 is like neutral, like you don't have ADHD. It's in the middle. And then 7 is that you likely have, like you're predisposed to ADHD behavior. What was the trick? I mean, honestly, it's not really a trick, but it's something I like that we actually do in science. But you can see that the vast majority, there's way more of the four allele, basically, like the middle allele. And I kind of cut that all out to develop my figures, basically. So I only focused on 1 and 2 for Africa, and then 1 and 2 for Europe. Yeah, you can see it again here. Sorry, just an idea for when you guys write papers. Like the idea is to convince people about your results. So I only put the results that I thought was most important for you guys. Like this is a seminar, I'm hoping to give you guys the ideas for your future papers. And I'm also not hiding from the frequencies, because the frequencies are quite low. Like you can even see I put 0.2 is not close to 8. But at the same time, like if somebody asks the question, like these are low frequencies, like I would say like there's clearly still a significant difference. So how do you explain that? That's what I would say. And that's how I built my hypothesis. But yes, what was your question? Yeah.
What you just said, I think, answered it. Because there was something that was kind of like unexpected. It was like the ADHD frequency.
Yeah.
Two areas is kind of the same.
Yeah. You can see for Europe and Africa, they're quite similar. And okay, and then Europe, there's increase. So I don't know. Maybe I'll go with the evolutionary explanation. All people evolved out of Africa, and then they basically left Africa. That's the general picture. And then this gene that they're studying here is for the DRD4, so it's a dopamine receptor gene. And basically, one of the effects of dopamine is, yes, ADHD, as we've mentioned, but it's also exploration. So what they try to say here was people that the more you leave Africa, the more exploration genes you have, basically. So, let's see if they, what they try to prove. So, I guess the general picture. So, actually, let's see. Yeah, so this is what they try to prove. Basically, the more you leave Africa, let's ignore Africa for now, but the more you leave Africa, the more ADHD genes you have. That's what they said. And it's reflected here. So you have Africa, but then the Americas have a lot, like Hispanic people, basically, have a bunch of ADHD genes. Let's see, yeah. So, sorry, let's kind of look at this slowly. So the idea would be, sorry, I want to explain these like the best way. There's some better results, actually. It's the cognitive abilities. And let me know if you guys are pressed on time. In the biogeographic origin of cognitive, yeah. See, I'm on Google Scholar a lot. The biogeographic distribution of cognitive ability, or FAST, and like, no, actually they have similar results, but of FAST life history traits. Yes, yeah, I'm kind of scared this won't open because U of T won't let me, but they have similar results. Yes, I'm not even with U of T anymore. Let's see if do I have a PDF here? Oh, actually, no. We should. That's what everyone tells us to do. Let's use Sci-Hub. Bad gateway. Oh. Okay, please work. Oh, does U of T block it? Maybe it does. Yeah, these are. I think they use the same data, but I have to see it again. So. No, man, come on. No. No figures, yeah. So hold on, let me see. No, what was that? That's something else. I don't want this DOI. Okay. Actually, this might be an example of like converging studies. Like I'll say this, they all say similar things. Will it work? Yeah, whatever. It's the same data, and yeah, I'll kind of show you. So for this, they looked at cognitive ability. I think, let me just double check the methods. Like, who was this on? National. So citizens actually. So like there's cities every country. So they took cognitive IQ scores in different cities, and it's similar results to what I showed you earlier.